Good evening and welcome. This is Badgers. We are back. It is Monday. It's a Q&A, and this is the sauna edition. Good evening. I think I've sweated out probably about half a stone already, just in the pre-roll. But yeah, stick around. We won't be sweating anymore. Of course, I'm in the chair tonight, not Dave. So that means only one thing: we are discussing sci-fi and not fantasy. And joining us this evening is Dr. Matthew Tyler Jones. I will call him Doctor.
Hello.
He has gone to the effort of getting a doctorate, so I think he deserves to be titled as that.
Thank you. Yeah, I did put that on the credits for my one of my games, at least.
It's actually on the Siren, which we're talking
about. It is
on
Siren. Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah. And I'll ask because I'm not sure. You're a doctor as well, aren't you, Lee?
No, I'm not.
No,
I'm just a master. You may refer to me as Mistress Lee if you so choose.
That's a thing now. We'll do that now. So we're going to be talking tonight with Matthew about CORIOLIS in general, and CORIOLIS, a one-shot adventure that he has written for conventions. I think is the intent of the product. It's called The Siren. It's a one-shot adventure, and like I say, it was intended to be run at conventions, but has, in the absence of any conventions, been put on Drive-Thru RPG, and you can pick a copy up for yourselves. And there is a link that will pop up in chat occasionally, and it is at the very, very, very low price of 50p, if I remember correctly.
Oh wow!
50 cents virtually US. 50 cents, I think, even cheaper in British money.
So we'll be talking a little bit about that. We're talking a little bit about what Matthew does. Again, as normal, if you have any questions, please post them in chat, and either Lee or Dave, who will be moderating this evening, will pick them up. We'll happily post them in my direction, and we'll put them to Matthew. Thanks as always to our supporters. You won't see the normal ads popping up. We are the Q&A. This is all about Free League this evening. So Free League have shown their support to us in doing these Q&As, in giving us some of these products to play. We are intending to play CORIOLIS in the future, and of course this is creators, with artists, with writers, with publishing companies, and bring these Q&As to the audience and get them out there. And that is exactly what we did with CORIOLIS. We've done with Simbrum, we've done with Versen for Free League. And these are great games, and we're not doing it because we get anything out of it. We're doing it because they are great products, and we're looking forward to telling you about it. Now, my experience with CORIOLIS actually began with Matthew at Dragon Meet in 2019 when he sold it to me, and I turned up at the Free League stand with my money to buy the Alien RPG, which had just been released at that point in time. We got talking about CORIOLIS, and I bought it, and since then I've bought several of the adventures, DM Shield, the maps. They are beautiful products.
Yeah,
I hope I sold you Alien as well, though.
You did sell me Alien as well, yes. Yes. And then I went and played the podcast version, and barely missed out on getting the limited edition Alien cover as well. So yeah, that was a good convention. Last one we went to, in fact.
Yes. Are you heading to UK Games Expo in a couple of weeks' time?
Yes, we are. Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, they will be.
Right, yes, it might be a bit far and hard for you to get from Denmark. But we'll be there running the Free League stand again in 2 weeks' time. So they can't come over again. So it'll be us and Tom, who's been doing some of the pictures that have been scrolling by on this window down here, I think.
It's right underneath you.
So while we're on the subject of the UK Games Expo, obviously you work for Free League, at least on a part-time basis. Do you want to tell everybody exactly what you do for Free League, as well as being a writer?
Freelance, I guess, is what you'd call it. So one of the reasons why the Siren is so cheap is Free League paid me to write it, with a view, as you said, to running it at conventions. And I do a little bit of other sort of paid work. We do some play testing, and I've done some GMing for online demonstration games in a sort of creative sense, but also Dave and I, my co-host and I, are kind of Free League's face in the UK when it comes to conventions, which started off actually at UK Games Expo 2 years ago, when Alien was being launched as not as a finished product but as a pre-order. They asked us to run demonstration games of that, which in the end became Hope's Last Day, which is the adventure in the core book. That wasn't the intention initially. The intention was to have Chariot of the Gods, but I think they realized that Andrew Gaskell writes too many words, and it was going to kind of double the size of the core book if that was the included adventure. So I said, would you like to do this? And please, please, please make it less than 5,000 words. And so Dave actually took the job of rewriting that on, getting it down into that 5,000. Because originally, to keep us from going mad, we'd kind of got a rota where we were going to be doing 7 or 8 sessions a day, and just playing the same adventure. I said, because I've done this sort of work before, I said, drives you mad. You don't know whether you're coming and going. You don't know. I mean, every game is different because the players are different, and that's just the splendid thing about role playing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you don't want to confuse, what happened in the last adventure with what's happening with this set of players in this adventure. So I said, we've got to do something maybe where we can use the same maps and but have 3 distinct adventures in that. So we actually I'm getting onto a bit of a roll here, so interrupt if you want, but we had 2 thoughts. The most exciting thing was when they made us sign an NDA without telling us what their new license was.
Right.
And then we got the email, and I was standing in my kitchen going, oh, Dave's going to be jumping up and down with this one. This is one of his favorite franchises. And sure enough, I then phoned him and he was jumping up and down. And it was Alien. So we thought, that's great. And of course, we got an early version of the rules in PDF. Mm-hmm. And I said, right, we've got to try and grok these rules. We can't tell anybody else about it. We just signed an NDA. But what if we got our home group and we gave them a science fiction Tales from the Loop session where they were kids running around a colony, and then at some point towards the end of that, they're looking down at their dad who's been injured out in the fields, and a chest burster pops out of him. And then we hand over the Alien rules and say, well, this is actually the game we're playing. And we didn't do that because bait and switch isn't a thing you really want to do to your players. But we laughed at the idea. And then we thought, hold on though. Could we do that, given very categorically Fox had told Free League that they didn't want to just recreate the movies. They wanted to move the timeline on about 3 years from that. So the first 3 movies, the first 3 filmed movies had happened, and obviously the latest 2 had happened 70 years beforehand. But they didn't really want to do Hadley's Hope. But we said, we're at a convention. We can do what we want. And so we thought, actually, that Hadley's Hope thing, and thinking about what stories might have happened in Hadley's Hope before the Marines arrived.
Yeah.
And so we created a little, what I called a tip trick of 3 stories called Last Hopes. And one of those stories, which was actually called originally Hope's Last Dance, and was about the Union Band, but that's something that sadly got cut by the Fox executives. I couldn't have a Union Band, sadly. And they were having to transport they were very wedded to their various musical instruments. And the idea was they had to make a decision. Do I take the tuba or do I run for my life? Was the idea of that one. They got changed Wildcatters and coming back and having to go through this pretty much destroyed already colony and find a way of escape, or indeed of not escaping. Spoilers.
That is a good adventure in the core rule, but it's a nice starter piece.
Yeah,
I have a question about that actually. When we talk about the Alien RPG, if we can talk about that before we get into Siren or the Siren. one of the things I really liked about the Alien RPG when I was looking it over is it doesn't seem like it's designed to be a long-term campaign overall. It feels like it's very oriented on these sort of one-shot situation scenarios. And that's different for me from what I'm used to playing for these long-term, you build a character, you go up. So how would you, in a scenario like that, how do you see development happening of these characters? I mean,
so one of the key mechanics, I think, that works so well in Alien is the idea of agendas. And that in a 3-act cinematic adventure, our little vignettes were just 1 act, but in a 3-act cinematic agenda, you get presented with a new agenda at the beginning of every act. And that shows some development in your character, which you may not, you may think, well, I didn't know I was going to do that. So the last character I played was in one of we play tested the Colonial Marines Operations Manual, and without giving anything away or trying not to give anything away, my character had an infection, and I didn't know that at the beginning, but through my agendas as 3 acts passed, I realized I was suffering from a thing. Actually, it wasn't that wasn't the Colonial Marines Manual. That was
Chariot of the Gods.
No, what's the one in between? A Destroyer of Worlds.
Right, yeah.
Yes. So we were playtesting that. That's another thing that we're often asked to do by Free League. And so yes, no spoilers there. But I think that turns into a challenge if you do want to run a campaign. So the last thing we have been playtesting is the Colonial Marines Operations Manual Adventure campaign, which works fine as a campaign, but it does feel quite a lot like 7 cinematic adventures, as opposed to necessarily a campaign. And there is quite a high death rate.
Right.
So a character that starts the campaign is not as likely to finish the campaign as many other characters in other games. What we're doing, actually, Dave and I are working on what we hope might be some of the Colonial campaign rules for when that comes out, and you can see our workings, if you like, on our YouTube channel, because we're having a little sort of West Marches campaign every other week on the Effect Podcast YouTube channel, and we are trying to we're playing around with tweaking the rules to make them less like cinematic rules and more like campaign rules, to see whether it's possible to do. And so one of the things, agendas play less of an important part in that version of the campaign that we're running there.
See, I actually really like the cinematic aspect of it, because then there's that huge element of risk that you put in there, because if you don't put yourself out there, you're gonna get killed either way. So what do you have to lose?
Absolutely. And by following, although there's no requirement that you follow your agendas, if you follow your agendas, you are rewarded with story points that you get as a player, not your character. So you can take an insane risk for your story point. Your character dies, and then in the next adventure, you can go, well, automatic success. I'm spending my story point now.
It's not necessarily even in the next adventure, is it? Because the way
or indeed in the
next chapter, because enough characters, enough NPCs turn up between chapters, particularly in Chariot of the Gods, without giving away any spoilers, but particularly in Chariot of the Gods, you've got a new cast of characters turning up in each chapter, and you can just pick up one of those NPCs and play them. So it's not, if people are concerned that, my character's going to die, I'm going to miss out on playing half the game, you're not. It's built into the mechanic. There is an expectation that there is not longevity.
But Lee, we love playing cinematic adventures. Most of what we've put on our YouTube, on our YouTube channel, are cinematic adventures. But, there is a particular charm to actually running in the Alienverse in a campaign. Our death rate is lower. Maybe that's not as good. I don't know. But I do feel our characters and the relationships between our characters are developing in a really organic way. I'm playing a communist police inspector. The colony is a UPP colony, so you're either communist or a capitalist swine in our neck of the woods. And you know, what started out, I feel, as a character's kind of a stereotype. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the marvelous, I think it's Amazon Prime detective series, Comrade Detective, which is a fabulous spoof of what a buddy movie would be like in Bulgaria or wherever in the 1980s. It started out like that, but I feel he's developing as a character, and it's really good fun to see him develop. I just, at some point, he's going to get eaten by a giant crab monster or something, and it's all gone.
Well, I mean, yeah. What are you going to do? We do have an audience question, if you're ready for that.
Yes, please. Yeah, go ahead.
What do you feel has been the best mechanic to develop?
Oh, well, so the best mechanic that we've developed, or the best mechanic in the oeuvre of the Free League Year Zero engine, is the first question to ask. And so I'm gonna rewind the clock a bit and actually change the subject to what we're talking about, which is Coriolis, as opposed to Alien. And when I first read Coriolis, what I loved about it was essentially the whole of the combat rules. But what they were, I could see straight away, was something that played incredibly fast and let you play kind of tactically without getting bogged down in tactics. So the idea basically being that you could, in that game, and remember all our Year Zero, all Free League's Year Zero games have slightly different mechanics, so it's not the same for every game. But in this game, you roll your dice. One success is all you need to hit somebody with your weapon, but the extra successes you get, you can then spend on tactical maneuvers, which are really quite sophisticated, quite quick. You didn't, and you know what you didn't end up doing is planning some marvelous tactical thing and then fudging it on your dice and it's all gone to waste, or even actually just spending time round the table with everybody going, no, don't do that, do this. And you roll your dice, and then, only then, when you've got extra successes to spend, do you start thinking about what it looks like in the movie of this game. And I loved that. I thought this is going to play really quickly and yet have a little bit of nuancing, disarming and stuff like that, that I'm always craving in combat games. What I hate is a game where I hit him with my sword, I hit him with my sword, I hit him with my sword until his hit points go down. So that's my favorite. That's the thing that got me into Coriolis first of all, and then into the Year Zero engine generally, of things that we've invented. Well, you know, I kind of don't want to spoil anything, but in the Siren, actually, I've done a thing, and it's not quite my invention. I noticed Ricard, I'm now playing through the second volume of Mercy of the Icons, The Last Cyclade.
Yeah.
I noticed Ricard's done the same thing, where in the original rulebook of Coriolis, you have hit points and you have mind points. And initially, mind points don't get used very much. Both Ricard and I have developed mechanics that actually attack your mind points, and they become a valuable resource in a way that they haven't been in the early versions of this version of Coriolis. And so I think that's the thing that I like best out of the work I've actually done myself. Right. And you see some of that you see quite a lot of that, actually, to be honest, in the Siren.
So if you were to take, because there's obviously a number of Free League titles that share the same dice mechanic, Coriolis and Alien being two of them, Mutant Year Zero, and I can't remember if there are others.
I can reel them off for you.
Well, if you were to take all across all those games, what three items are different in different titles would you take and say, this is where I'll go for my next development? These three things are the best thing about the dice.
Okay,
dice
so
mechanic.
the first thing, and And it isn't necessarily a thing I'd necessarily take from any one of the games, but the first rule of designing a year zero game is what is your push mechanic? Because your push mechanic kind of defines the feel of the game.
Yeah, yeah.
So
in Alien,
so
that's stress. In
Alien,
Coriolis,
for example, that's the
darkness.
brilliant, absolutely the thing that makes Alien feel like Alien is when you push your die roll. And maybe you ought to explain to some of your audience that you when you initially look at your die pool, you've got maybe 6 dice, and to win you've got to roll 1-6 to succeed. And if you have 6 dice, you think, well, I've got a 1 in 6 chance of doing that, and generally that doesn't pan out. I mean, in the great world of statistics and rolling, yes, it does, but you're often quite disappointed that you haven't got that success you wanted.
Yeah,
and
you
lots
often
of people
want to just choose a different number because the probability is the same, but
Yes.
you definitely roll more 3s and 4s than you do 6s.
Yeah, but of course, as soon as you'd chosen that different number, then you'd be getting loads of 6s. That's just the way that dice fall. And a lot of people think, oh, we need to adjust that. We need to make it 5s or 6s or 4s, 5s and 6s. And no, you don't. You just got to acknowledge that pushing is part of the game, and it's it's a decision-making process, and it comes at a cost. And the cost can be different. So in Alien, it's the brilliant stress dice. Now, that works so well for Alien. I wouldn't necessarily. Dave and I are working on a Wild West version of the rules, and stress isn't a thing that features really in the Wild West. So I'm not going to use stress for that. So we're not going to take that, but we spend a lot of time thinking about what our push mechanic is that's going to really get the theme we're looking for in our particular Wild West. So there's the thing that I love from Tales from the Loop, where the equivalent of the push mechanic there is actually quite limiting in that you've got about 3 times in a game that you can push your dice before you have to run home to mother or grandma in my particular case, my character's case. And the idea that you can't die in Tales from the Loop, but you do have to go home and recover. And my way of doing that would be to run home to grandma, and she's always got a nice steaming bowl of artsuppen, which is yellow split pea soup, Swedish delicacy with ham hocking. It's gorgeous, comforting, and it gives me all my re-rolls back. It's great, but yeah, every time you roll the dice, you have to take a condition. It's much the same for Western. It's worse for Western. There are more conditions, so you can re-roll the dice more often, but they're more deadly. You can actually die when you've taken all your conditions in Western. And so you can, in the sequel to Tales from the Loop, Things from the Flood, because you're teenagers and teenagers can die. Now, just go back to Things from the Flood. That feels a more limiting mechanic. There's a really finite number of times you can push your roll. As I say, 3 or 4 times, and then you've got to just finish the scene, and you've got to run away. Whether you run away with the other kids or whether you just run home crying, that's what your character's got to do. And that feels just like the sort of children's television that I was watching in the 70s, and I'm pretty sure the guys from Free League were watching in the 80s, because they're so much younger than me. And so it fits the genre. Yeah. And in fact, one of the things I feel now, looking back on it, I would always say that Coriolis is my favorite game. But actually, the darkness point mechanic there now feels a bit clunkier than all the other push mechanics that they've developed. I'm not, as if you like, it was the second push mechanic they'd ever invented, and maybe they hadn't quite realized the power of the push mechanic to set genre. I love it. I wouldn't change it, to be honest. If somebody comes along and suggests a better one for 3rd edition, then I might go, wow, that was brilliant, but I can work with this. But it does put a lot of pressure on, and this is important for you actually, Steve, as a GM, working out how to spend the darkness points you get without looking like you're being a git is your big challenge here. They can feel arbitrary. And my advice to you is you're going to get loads. Look, from the last session, I've got 16 darkness points sitting next to me in Australia. I will just throw them out for little inconsequential things because it makes something inconsequential seem important to the players. So you might say, there's a hailstorm. It's a darkness point. I go, who made that hailstorm come? What's going on? That's fine. I've spent that darkness point. It's only a hailstorm. So yeah, I think I'm now it took me quite a few sessions to get into the darkness point economy. Now it feels really natural, but it's the clunkiest of all the push mechanics.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. I when I first read it, I really like the idea of the darkness points. It's a way of, I guess to a certain extent, pushing the characters back in the direction of the campaign or the one shot that you're on, because they do love to go off and do their own thing. But I appreciate exactly what you're saying there, which is to make it part of the narrative and not be confrontational. Because when I first started playing role-playing games, there was a lot of confrontation between the players and DMs, and it's just the culture of the game at that point in time. And now it isn't that; it's much more this shared storytelling experience. So yeah, I can see how that darkness mechanic can be seen as being more confrontational, more DM versus players. So yeah, you got to be careful with that. That's a really good comment. I like that.
And if I can take it one step further, the one thing you must never spend a single darkness point on, although it is actually in the rules, players don't run out of ammunition until you choose to spend a darkness point and tell them they've run out of ammunition. And whenever you choose to do that, they will take it as you, Steve, being a git and not letting them shoot the person. So I still haven't worked out when to make them run out of ammunition, but actually a few times I have. So there have been times when after they've done something really good with their gun, I've said, oh, by the way, darkness point, your magazine's empty now. But never do it when they're pointing their gun at the big bad. They hate that.
No,
not me. Then it's time to throw the gun or start punching. That's great. That's a great one. Who cares about ammunition? It's time to hit things.
Yeah, you wait till you do that to a player, though. It turns out
I am the player. I am his player. Please take away my ammunition. I give you permission. It's okay.
Good. No, that's
this is why I like to play Brawlers.
So the push mechanic, that's something I love, and a different push mechanic for every game is, I think, vitally important. You told me top 3. So the other rules that I think I'm quite a fan of something that doesn't happen in Coriolis, but does happen in Mutant Year Zero and Forbidden Lands, and I think it might happen in Twilight 2000, but I'm not sure, is you can damage yourself. Your cost for pushing can be a risk of damage to your stats.
Right.
And I really like that. Again, some players don't. They don't like to be made weak by combat, and having been a stage fighter in my past, and I'm knowing how bloody tiring it is. And knowing that when you, I used to be a competitive fencer, and when you stretch that little bit further, and your knee buckles about over that point of balance, then yes, it hurts. So
and you will know about it.
Yes, you've rolled a bane on your sword fighting skill there.
We have another audience question. What makes this Coriolis different to other RPGs?
Okay, well, I think science fiction RPGs in general have got a problem, because the very first science fiction RPG was Traveller, and it was pretty much all science fiction. It wasn't very Star Wars, but there were laser swords, so actually it was quite Star Wars. Not very Star Wars, but pretty much it's all of science fiction. So every single science fiction that comes after it is something that we've got a great patron of our podcast, actually, who's an old friend of Dave's and mine, and he always says, "Oh, a nice setting, but you can do it in Traveller." And And so, yeah, you can do all of this in Traveller, and Traveller can be all things to all men. But what makes Coriolis special for me, and again, this is a thing that I might steal from another game for Coriolis, is prayer. Now, I'm an atheist. I'm not a very spiritual person, but I always give this comparison. I have played for 30 years a Pendragon campaign, and in Pendragon, you are playing a godly knight or a knight who at some point through their history will find God. Finding God is part of being in a Pendragon story. And yet in 30 years of playing, I don't think I've ever said, oh, well, my character is going to spend this a bit of time we've got here going to a chapel and praying to God. Whereas as a player, and as I've done it, and as a GM, I have seen my players go, okay, we've arrived in this new town. Now, where's the nearest chapel? Because we have got to pray to the icons. And again, it comes out of the push mechanic, because explanation for people that haven't played it before. If you pray to a particular icon that covers one of your skills in advance of the situation where you're actually going to need to pray to push your roll, then you get an extra dice just for praying to that icon. Mm-hmm. And if you do it in a chapel, you get 2 extra dice. And that can really make the difference between success and failure in this game. So, my characters now in character are religious and deeply religious, and they firmly believe, as Tony said when we invited him on to our first Players and their man, he said, well, of course the icons are real, because when you pray, you get a benefit. Not all the time necessarily, but you can see a prayer to the icon is answered. And so obviously, you're going to believe in the gods. And that simple mechanic, I've played loads of quasi-medieval games like Pendragon, where people deeply believe in, if not a single monolith, a single god, they believe, then there's a whole pantheon of gods they can believe in. But all they ever are is, I'm going to ask this god for a favor. There's never any of that. I am going to abase myself before the power of this god. And yet it just happens naturally as part of Pendragon, part of Coriolis, in a way that it doesn't happen within the mechanics of Pendragon.
Yeah, it really struck me when I was reading the book that it has this element of the magical realism literary genre.
Yeah.
Where magic is not unusual, it's just an everyday part of life, and it's just how you interact with things. Culturally, I'm Puerto Rican, and so there's this thing where if something happens to you in a dream, it's, God has confirmed this to you. And I saw elements of that when I was reading through about the icons. And that really hooked me into playing the game. And it's why one of the first things I asked Steve when we talked about it is like, do you love me enough to put me in your Coriolis game? So I was like, because I can see which icon my character would be and how to build a character around this icon and how it would impact her life and all that stuff. So I really loved that. One more question that keeps coming up in the chat is what's the deal with the capybaras?
Right, okay. This is really specific to the campaign we're running.
All right.
I'm going to keep this answer really short.
Okay.
One point, we had a guest character who was a Scavara, which are kind of man-sized rat creatures. Mm-hmm. And he'd spend a little bit of time. If you can point a criticism at Coriolis, it says you can play as what are called semi-intelligences, which are these part animal, part human, or humanoid animal types. But it doesn't really fill that out very much. And so he'd developed a bit of Scavara culture. And instead of prayer to the icons, they're very much they're carnivores who take sacrifice, which is essentially eating another creature, as their prayer. And so at some point he was preparing for this, he'd worked this in, and he said, oh, I'm just going to find a pet shop. I want to buy a small mammal or something. And I thought, as GM, I'm not going to have you killing a hamster on my watch. So I just said, thinking, what is the cutest rodent in the world that everybody loves. It's the capybara. And so the capybara survived, obviously. The Skavara found that he couldn't bring himself or get the opportunity away from everybody else to do the sacrifice of the capybara. He shot somebody, he ran off. And there's a lovely bit of that story that's that now, for various reasons, that Skavara realizes what's going to happen on Coriolis, and actually all the Skavara are now leaving Coriolis. That's just a lovely bit of a detail that's going on in the background. But the crew are left with Hammy, the capybara, and he features in occasional episodes. But yeah, that's just our campaign. Although Ricard and Croyer has promised to put a capybara into the third part of Mercy of the Icons in honor of the campaign. So that's great. Yeah.
See, I have a Brazilian friend who hates capybaras, and she's going to be very disappointed.
Oh no!
It's because they're
capybara. Who can hate a capybara?
Brazilians. It's because they're everywhere, and apparently they smell bad.
Oh right, well, yeah. So does Kavara. Nobody complains about them. And I notice here that there's a question here that says, "What sci-fi authors have you drawn from for Coriolis?" And I think the original, and it is worth talking about this. It's in the pitch, but obviously Shahrazad 1001 Arabian Nights is a big influence on the setting. It's not Arabian, but it is a culture that is distinctly not European,
right?
Which is lovely. It doesn't mean to say there are no Europeans there. I mean, we've moved on. It's 1,000 years since a lot of these people left Al-Ada, or Earth that was. So, you know, things have moved on. Things have moved on here on Earth in the last 1,000 years. So, yeah, culture's changed quite a lot. But, you know, its root comes from the feel of 1001 Nights. And I think that's really important. But some of the other references that Matthias Lilja, who we interviewed a few years ago as the creator of the original Coriolis, his company has now come back into the fold. So he's now in charge of Coriolis again.
Yeah.
And I think he would point very much to Event Horizon as being a massive influence on the setting as a whole.
Right.
Yeah.
So Event Horizon. And I think then the Free League guys, because they were fans like us who kind of took over Coriolis when the first incarnation of Jan Ringen decided to give up producing games, and they brought in Firefly. So the spiel now says it's Firefly with Arabian Nights, but I think that's very much their influence. Whereas I do think Matthias Lilja was thinking it's Event Horizon with Arabian Nights, and so Shaitan is real, I think. And I think we're going to be seeing some of that in the third part of the Mercy of the Icons story. I think it'll get a lot more Event Horizon-y.
Yeah, we were talking about it too. Blade Runner also came up as an influence, especially the more recent one that was in that whole desert setup.
Yes. No, actually, that is. I have my problems with that. The story elements of that, but the aesthetics of that.
The aesthetics,
yeah. I think there's some of that. Also, something that's definitely influenced me is and I cannot remember the name of the story, the name of the author, but the book is When Gravity Fails, and it's a detective story. Cannot remember the name, but it's an arabesque feel of a city, so not a European city. Feels a little bit like Casablanca, again, is another influence for me. That idea of various cultures coming together and politics being played out. I'm sure there's one other influence I'm forgetting that's quite important. Well, maybe when we get talking to the Siren, we can talk about some of the influences directly on that.
What do you want to talk about the Siren?
Let's move on to that. Yeah.
Okay, so Matthias Lilja asked me to write a convention adventure, hoping I think that conventions were going to be more of a thing than they are. I mean, I think there will be games played at UK Games Expo, but I know we're not having any demo games in our stand, even though we've got a bigger stand, so we could have more space for demo games, which we just feel that it's not at the moment the right time to be crowding around a table and fondling each other's dice. So we're not going to be running it there, but we wrote this game for them, and I have to say the influence comes from, this is a scenario that I had kind of created on the fly for a previous campaign that Dave and my home group were running. So I'd had this idea, and I said this could work quite well. But one of the challenges I feel about Coriolis is the third horizon itself is actually incredibly daunting, not just to a GM who goes, well, it's not daunting. It's wonderful. Every paragraph is a story hook, I feel, as an adventure.
Yes, it is, yeah.
But there are a lot of paragraphs there.
There are.
There's a lot to absorb about who's going on where. I was just helping one of my colleagues going, he's just read through the first bit of Mercy of the Icons, and he's kind of going, why are they doing this? And I had to kind of remind him of all the pieces in play, which is why these particular characters are motivated in this particular way. And it's a massive, I mean, it's not as massive as, say, Glorantha or the World of Darkness, but it is a massive culture to get your head around with all sorts of factions. And it's tough for GMs, but it's even tougher for players, I think. And there's a lot of people who say, well, we shouldn't be writing an adventure that kind of introduces people to the scale and scope of the third horizon. And I kind of feel, for a starter adventure, no, let's do something that doesn't talk about the scale and scope of the third horizon, that only hints at it. So in this particular adventure, I'd spent all my darkness points trying to kill the players, and I'd failed. They were all alive, but broken. And they'd committed a crime. So I thought, well, let's send them to prison, because you know how players love being sent to prison. Not. But the deal was, by going to prison, I'd spend all my darkness points. So I was starting with a clean state. So they were, accepting of that. And so we created this idea of being on a prison planet. And over a course of hours of play, I frustrated them and made them feel the real ennui of being in prison, and there was the promise of a spaceship at the end of it. And this is where one of our first influences comes in. I'd said to Dave, my co-host, I said, well, tell you what, if you can design the ship, even the ship will be there, and you can design it, but my vision is it's the Liberator. And so you design the Liberator from Blake 7.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So
there's a reference I haven't heard in a while.
Well, yeah, and I feel it's one that could go very well.
Yeah.
That story could work really well in the third horizon.
Yeah.
So we had this prize I'd offered them. And then there were a lot of adventures to get to finally taking off from the planet in that ship. And actually, we've not played, because then the lockdown happened. This is a face-to-face group, so they've never enjoyed the ship they've had, because we started off on Mercy of the Icons, and Dave's never had the opportunity to it. So, but he said, oh God, he was really angry during that, incredibly frustrated. And we were playing late into night, so it was like 2:00 in the morning. We'd been drinking, and the things just weren't going right for him. He was furious about it. But at the end of it, he got, God, that was brilliant. I really felt that as a total emotional roller coaster. You've got to write that up as an adventure. So then when Matthias said, write this adventure, I thought, well, here's an opportunity to actually pull my notes, because I'm a low to no prep GM. So my notes are like 3 different bullet points and then what I scribbled down in the game. And I can't even read my own handwriting when I scribble it down in the game. So my notes are hopeless. It's not an easy transition. But I thought, well, if they're paying me to do this, I can pull my memories together, listen again to the podcast we made of it, start building a story together. But then I realized, that was about 18 hours of play, I think. And this has got to be something that fits. At Freely, we feel very much that a convention scenario shouldn't be 4 hours, because, as you said, Steve, people make different choices.
Yeah.
So you've got to design it for 2 hours, and then if you've got 4 hours, you've got luxury. But if you do it in 2 hours, then people can enjoy lots of games, or we can turn over games at the Free League stand quite quickly if we want to railroad them. But if you've got a 4 hour slot, you can relax on the railroading. And I said, we can't do all of this So we chose one particular sequence from kind of the middle of the story, although we've made it kind of the end of a larger story. And we did that brief exploration. And if you think about what 2 hours of play would entail, that's not even 3 acts of an alien adventure. That is a really short adventure. It's a discovery and an explanation and a thing that you have to defeat or deal with. But it could be so that's this adventure. It's very simple, and I wanted to have lots of opportunities to roll dice in a relatively safe way, to learn the mechanic and to think about prayer. Because if having said that prayer is one of the most important parts of Coriolis that differentiates it from other science fiction role-playing games, if you don't say at the beginning of the adventure, right, okay, you've reached the top of the glacier, who wants to pray? And give people the opportunity to pray and talk about prayer, then you're failing in introducing Coriolis to the adventure. So we've taken a slice out of this massive Prism Planet adventure that I created for my players and turned it into a very neat and compact adventures that introduce people to the rules, gives them a little hint about the bigger third world. And if you like, it could go a little bit further than it does here. It implies, well, the ending of this is, and here's an opportunity to escape and have your own ship. It doesn't actually go into that having your own ship bit, but then a GM could say, well, this is the ship you escape from the planet on, then, and your adventure in the Third Horizons begin.
Yeah, it could be used as a perfect intro into a larger campaign.
Yeah,
and again, that's something that is for me a little bit unique about Coriolis. Is the first thing it tells you to do as a group is sit down and decide what the group ethos is going to be. You're either prisoners, you're travelers, you're pilgrims, and it's that group choice.
Yeah.
And that is something that sums up Coriolis for me, is that emphasis on togetherness.
Yeah, it's very collaborative, and I love that.
And finding that I don't. This is a bit of a cliche but I'll say it anyway. So finding that family is kind of what I'm trying to do with this adventure in a little way. Everybody starts off with different motivations, maybe even competing motivations, but hopefully they find that by working together, they do build that. Now, I provided GMs with 5 Pregens. Most of them are actually NPCs from the campaign that I was running for my friends in terms of where they came from. And so if you read them, you might think, or even if you see some of my son's drawings, you might think, well, that looks familiar. I don't know if you've seen in this box down here below me, you might have seen Keanu Reeves in a dressing gown. And there was a character that so here comes another influence from that. I don't know if it was a straight-to-video movie, and it stars Jason Momoa and Keanu Reeves, and incredibly weirdly Bruce Carey is in there as well. And it's set in a prison in the deserts of Texas or somewhere like that, where people are just stuck in a prison with a bottle of water and left to fend for themselves. And so that prison planet that you're on, and indeed the early part of the adventure, was pretty much, which isn't in the Siren, was pretty much that film updated for this world. And so those characters, I couldn't go as far as Bruce Carey. So I changed him for a character that from our culture, Steptoe from Steptoe and Son, and indeed in the campaign I ran, in the adventure I ran for my players, it was Steptoe and Son. It was The two of them were junk dealers roving across this prison planet.
Is it the Bad Batch?
Yeah, that's it.
The Bad Batch, that's the one, yes. Did I not mention? I forgot the name. The problem with the Bad Batch is there's now about 3 different things called the Bad Batch. So
yeah, one of them
when I
being
say the
Star
Bad
Wars
Batch is an
cartoon.
influence, I do not mean the thing about the clone troopers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a
I
great
haven't
movie.
seen that.
It's
I
not
haven't
a
checked it
great
out.
movie. I think it's worth a watch, actually. I really enjoyed it.
It's a fun movie. It's okay. I love terrible movies, so it'll be
right,
great.
yes.
Yeah.
It's on Netflix, I think.
Well, we get different Netflix here, but I'll look.
Oh,
It might be Netflix as a
I'm gonna go find out.
well worth it. Well worth it. If any of our viewers haven't seen it, not well worth it. It's kind of
Oh, it is.
I got halfway through.
Well, you missed some of the best bits, or rather, no, you didn't. I don't know. It's a movie to be experienced, in my viewpoint.
I will certainly experience it this weekend, I guess.
Anyway, that is, if you like, that's the pre-story. So very little of that appears in here, but you will recognise. I can see on the screen now. I think this is from some minutes ago. We've got mustachioed Keanu Reeves on the screen and in his dressing gown. And I basically gave my son a still out of the movie and said, "Let's draw him, make him a bit different, give him an Arabic dressing gown." And he's now one of the main characters here. But I did promise that when we got bronze and silver or copper and silver medals on drive-through, that I would do some more content, and some of it was going to turn these into NPCs if you want to bring your own characters into the game. And I think, although I crafted these characters carefully, these pre-gens, for the challenges that I met, I think actually most groups should be able to meet these challenges with their pre-generated characters, with their own generated characters.
Yeah, I quite like the idea of having the pre-gen. So especially if you're running the game with the intent of teaching people the game mechanic, they have less to focus on worrying about getting their stats right and those sort of things. So I think the pre-gens is great, and like I say, in a document that's only 50 cents, not even 50p, 50 cents, you can pick that up and you can just run it for a group. It is giving it away for free as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, so the idea, obviously, when we realised we weren't necessarily going to be having convention games, and in fact, it's something I did last year. So I didn't get paid for it last year, but that was okay. So Nils last year had asked me to write a Vaesen adventure, or rather, we were going to be running Vaesen at UK Games Expo, and I'd said to Dave, "I'll write an adventure for it." And so I'd written this adventure, and then UK Games Expo didn't happen, and so the money I was going to get paid for that didn't happen. And I said to Nils, "It's a good adventure." Nils had commented on it. It's called Summer in December. It's more expensive than 50p because Nils didn't pay me for it. But he said, "Well, why don't you turn it into a Free League Workshop thing and at least get some money back that way?" So, of course, I did. And that's proved quite popular. This time I got paid for the writing of it. I paid Tom for the illustration, and Coriolis fan John Salquist did the cover image as well. They've all been paid, but so effectively everybody's been paid. So I'm only, in fact, charging 50p for it rather than giving it away for free, because it only appears in the charts if
you charge for it.
Yeah, you only get the medals if people spend money on it.
Right.
And 50 cents will mean that even if they run a sale, it'll still be above the 20-cent threshold that gets you counted. And I just like to have our things counted. I like to know how many people are enjoying the adventure. And yeah, we've already got our silver medal. We're on our way to gold, so I'm happy for that.
So how many do you sell to get a silver?
Oh, it's great. So to get copper, you need to sell 51, and silver is 101. I think then the leap to gold, I think off the top of my head, correct me in the comments if you know better than me, but I think it's 251 to get gold. So the next one is a bit of a leap. But we got copper in the first day, which totally stunned me.
Wow.
There you go. We have a couple more audience questions if you've got time.
By all means.
Yep, we can. I'll tell you what we'll do. We are at the hour, so we'll run a little bit longer because we've still got some questions to go through. If you're happy to, Matthew.
Cool. Yep. No problem at all.
Roll on for maybe another 15 minutes.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you have any particular favorite characters that you have designed?
In Coriolis, and in fact, in this adventure, in a way, although you don't really meet them, I had a character that I would only call Kadeen, and I loved Kadeen. I loved the concept behind Kadeen, which you will come across in this adventure. I loved playing Kadeen, and I loved the way that Kadeen pissed off our players. If GMs take Kadeen from this adventure, they could potentially put him into their campaign and played him the way I did, then that they should have a whale of a time too. I loved him. So he's my favorite character. In terms of player characters, I have to say the character I'm currently playing in Alien, Inspector Shu, I'm just in love with him. I keep telling Dave, who's the GM there, that we should rechristen the whole campaign the Inspector Shu Mysteries, but I'm not sure he agrees.
The famous Inspector Shu, as mentioned in chat. So
that's one of the things that I think makes a campaign either a memorable PC within the group or a memorable NPC. And one of the things I like to do is have a recurring NPC, normally who's in opposition to the party, maybe not an arch enemy, but somebody that can cause a bit of irritation every now and again. And yeah, I think that is key. When you're talking about Inspector Shield, all I've got in my head now is the guy in The Expanse in the first season. I can't remember his name.
Thomas Jane's character?
Yeah, Thomas Jane's character. Yeah.
There's a little bit of Thomas Jane in Inspector Shu. Actually, I think he probably would have a cheap hat like Thomas Jane's, but he wears a tracksuit like Comrade Detective. And right. I don't know whether I can show this in your. I don't know what your, but he has a lighter that's engraved, and there were many Zippo lighters like this with an expletive and a suggestion of what might be done to communism. His, of course, being a good progressive communist, says the same of capitalism on this lighter. And that's my signature item in Alien, which gets me a point of stress back when I use it. I loved it so much, I've even got a lighter engraved with said phrase.
We get the audience says it's Miller is Thomas Jane's character from The Expanse.
Yeah, that's it. That's all I could picture in my head when you were talking about Inspector Shu.
Yeah. The other question we had was, what mechanics do you hope they can add or change in Coriolis?
So, yeah, I've already said this a little bit, and although I am now fully in love with Darkness Points and I can't think of anything better, I'd be interested if the Free League team come up with a slightly more refined version of Darkness Points and Prayer and Pushing in Coriolis. There are some weaknesses, and in fact, the Coriolis community is relatively young and relatively small compared to the guys who've been writing about and imagining RuneQuest for 40 years or so. So we're babies compared to them, but they're pulled together. So one of the things that the community have done, which I think they deserve a special shout out for, is they've taken a bunch of old Swedish material from the first edition and turned it into what's called the Community Atlas. So lots of stuff that was edited out of the English edition, I think purely for reason of space, has now come back into the consciousness of modern day English language Coriolis players. So that's great. And one of the other things that's just happened is one of the community members, who I'm desperately trying to remember their name, but I can't, I'm sorry, has just created some revised combat rules, not all of which I agree with, but there are some definite gaps. Like the stun rules in Coriolis are pretty much non-existent. So
That's true.
These are out there. If you go to the Year Zero Discord, you'll find them there, and they may fix a couple of problems. Poison. Ricard has actually, I think, fixed poison in Mercy of the Icons 2.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of happy with the way that goes now, but that was essentially a non-thing. The thing that frustrates players of you roll a number of dice and a 6 is a success can frustrate GMs when they've, here's this terrible poison, you roll X dice, nothing happens very much. Fire is another one that goes through a number of other games where it does seem sometimes you can walk through a burning room covered in petrol and still come out totally unharmed. And we've put some stuff up on our on my blog, and we talk about it on our podcast with some slightly toughened up firewalls.
Right. Okay, I'm going to ask you on a different subject now. So you're obviously going to UK Games Expo, which is next week. What are you going to be doing there? You've talked about the biggest stand you've got. What are you going to be doing when you're there?
We're going to be selling Free League stuff for the most part. I think some of the stuff that people may see for the first time there is Alberator, the campaign, the next chapter of the campaign for Simbaroom, and the hopefully the Colonial Marines Operations Manual, which is our first big campaign for Alien, although obviously that, as I've said, is quite a lot like a series of cinematic adventures. So those are the big things there. But I'm going to be pushing Coriolis. I pushed Coriolis on you at Dragon Meet, and initially I remember at Dragon Meet they were going to say they gave us a stop list of what they wanted us to sell, and Dave and I both went, but there's no Coriolis on here. So they solved that, and I think we sold every copy of Coriolis, and I made that point then. So there's that. I think just tentatively, Dave is going to be running a seminar. The guys from UKG have just had some guys who are going to be running a seminar on writing drop out, and so they asked Free League if they could provide anybody, and Dave has said, well, let's have a chat with it, but yes, we can probably do this. So Dave will be running that seminar, and obviously while Dave's doing that, I'm going to be going up to get the award from the UK Games Expo Awards for Vaesen winning Best Role-Playing Game.
Oh,
that's
awesome.
in my dreams. But that can only happen, viewers, if you vote for Vaesen as Best Role-Playing Game at the UK Games Expo Awards. It's simple. There's other games we like there as well. The D-Sanction, which is another game we featured on the podcast and on our stream, is competing against Vaesen. But I fell in love with Vaesen last year in a way I never expected to. I mean, obviously, the stuff that Free League produces is very good. But the adventures we've had, both round the table just before lockdown and then on screen on lockdown, the characterization, the role playing that happens in Vaesen seems almost magical. I can't point to a single mechanic that encourages the sort of role playing we get in Vaesen. I think it's something to do with the setting, but people who play Vaesen just fall completely into their characters and have such a whale of a time. They do throw their guns at people when they've run out of ammunition.
I mean, it's something I can talk to from personal experience as somebody who has actually married a Nordic cryptid. My husband is an ice giant, and
yeah. Well, so you understand entirely.
Yeah, it's just it's an everyday part of my life, and it's okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah.
So one of the things that won't be at UK Games Expo, but Dave and I are working on it now, is Graham. I have name aphasia. Famous campaign writer, did the Warhammer campaign, The Enemy Within.
Anyway, I'm terrible at names, so
he
I'll
has
just ask
written,
Google.
he has written Vaesen, Britain and Ireland, which will be looking at what's happening here in these sceptered isles, which is going to be the first major supplement for Vaesen. And Dave and I have been doing a little bit of editing of that. I think I still have to do the stat blocks, all the MPCs. So I'll be doing that quite shortly as well. But that won't be at UK Games Expo. That will be later in the year that comes out.
Graham Davis.
Yeah.
Graham Davis. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's my job here.
So very last question then. You're going to be working at UK Games Expo. I assume you're going to go there and do a bit of shopping as well. What are you hoping to find there?
What am I hoping to buy? Oh dear. I'm currently unemployed. And so I have been not kickstarting things, although I did have to say I fell for yet another science fiction game whose name I can't remember, but it looks lovely. It's kind of bluesy. Orbital Blues. I did weaken and kickstart Orbital Blues, but I'm going to try not to spend too much. But I think what I'm really looking at when I go there won't be in the role-playing sector, it'll be in the board game sector. And I'm not entirely sure which one it'll be because they're all quite expensive, but there's a few on my list. I think. Yeah, I think. Although, you know, and I'm never going to get a chance to play it, but the whole Spire world excites me.
Right.
And I might relent and get that. Oh, and also I always look for, and I haven't yet found, if anybody has a hardback copy of the Warren, the Powered by the Apocalypse game.
Yes, okay, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
which is my favorite Powered by the Apocalypse game. It's the one that introduced people to Powered by the Apocalypse by. It's about rabbits. It has. I ran a incredibly distressing and emotive adventure, which is published by Billy Pulpit, which is about rabbits in what's called Polygon Wood in the middle of the First World War.
Wow.
It's gripping stuff.
Yeah.
I wish, I generally don't, when I kickstart something from America, I go for the PDF because import charges and shipping and all that sort of nonsense. But that's of all the PDFs I've bought, that's the one I really would love to have in hardback. So maybe if I spot that, I'll buy that.
Yeah. I don't know if they're having a bring and buy. Actually, we was trying to find out.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of hoping that one of the you know, the big shop stands will bring out some old stock of it that they ordered and didn't sell. And the other one, actually, again from Billy Pulpit, although I don't quite have the desire for it, but again the PDF was so lovely, I kind of went, oh, I wish I had these illustrations on paper, and that's Night Witches. Again, which I've never played because at the time that I got it, I was playing with a group that involved a bunch of 40-year-old men and a 13-year-old girl, and I wasn't happy with running, you know, lesbian fighter pilots.
No,
with that
specific group. No, that's an interesting balance. So no, but I can see your hesitation.
It was a great story, and it's a lovely, lovely work of art as a book.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I spot that, I might pick that up in paper as well.
Yeah, it's interesting how when because we get PDFs through as well. But if I like the PDF, I know Dave always buys the books. I will always buy the books, and even if I've got the PDF, I still go and buy the book because there is something about just having the paper copy, having those coloured illustrations. And that's one thing also about all of the free league books. They're great. Printing on them and papering them is the next level in terms of
really. I mean, Nils comes out of publishing, and I think, you know, he and the rest of them, I don't think it's all Nils, but Nils, I think, is definitely somebody there who knows about sourcing stuff, and they just create something that is so right for the genre of the game, whatever it is. I mean, Forbidden Lands generally, as a group, my own group aren't into fantasy at all. But when we saw what Forbidden Lands was, we knew we had to get it because that was the role-playing game we wanted in the 80s when everything was stapled. And that was, finally somebody had made the game that we all dreamed about, and again, the One Ring. So, Free League had just taken over the One Ring, just seen the alpha for that. And I remember looking at the One Ring from Cubicle 7, and it's lovely. And I don't want to disrespect any of the artists in there. There's some beautiful artwork in there. But the book didn't feel like something from Tolkien's world, and the new version so does.
Right.
In PDF at least. And I've got a sneaking suspicion it will on paper as well.
Yeah. Right, I'm going to refrain from asking you any more questions because it's 10:15. We've run over by 15 minutes. So we will wrap up now. I will ask you live because I was going to ask you after anyway, but I'll ask you live. Would you come back and we'll do a Q&A about Alien?
Oh, yes, please.
Oh,
please.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you what, if you could invite my mate Dave as well, because he is the real.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We'd love to do that. Yeah.
Because then I can ask him all about the adventure that he wrote for Alien, which is where you play from the point of view of the alien.
Oh.
Yes, which has been on our podcast. Alien, it is. I thoroughly disapproved of it, and the show notes in our podcast reflect my disapproval. But everybody had a whale of a time, and so we would happily come and talk about Alien.
Awesome.
Yeah, but my girlfriend back home in the States, Elle, is always asking me whenever we do conversations with Free League, are you going to talk about Alien? Are you going to talk about Alien this time? I have so many questions about Alien. When are you getting Alien? Are you going to do Alien? So, oh yeah, absolutely. 100% here for that.
The first 20 minutes of this session was about aliens. She should be pleased.
Well, she was at work, so. But
we'll do it and we'll time it for Elle as well.
We'll time it for Elle. Okay, good. So appreciate the shout out.
Right. Well, thank you very much for coming on tonight. We will arrange a future Q&A for Alien. Not till after UK Games Expo though.
Thank you.
But thank you for joining us tonight. Much appreciated. There's been links in chat to the Drive Through RPG page. Please go and get the adventure. It's 50 cents. That's less than a can of Coke. Buy it, read it, play it, get people involved in Coriolis. It is a great game. Don't be put off by the fact it's sci-fi.
That's my big thing.
Yeah.
We started off talking about Coriolis because I want more people playing it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And even if sci-fi is not your thing, it is still a great game, and it's not just about the sci-fi at all by any means. So we'll wrap up there. So thank you for joining. Thank you, chat, for your questions. Thank you again, Matthew, for joining us, and Mistress Lee. Thank you for being the host this evening.
Thank you for having me. I'm always delighted to be here.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure to meet you both.
Yeah. So thank you. What have we got this week? My brain is going to melt in a minute. We are back on Thursday. We are on Saturday, I believe. Avernus did finish last weekend, but I believe there is a wrap party on Saturday this week, and we will be back again on Sunday, running the third session of Lost Lights. So stay tuned for those for the rest of this week. Otherwise, everyone stay safe. Have a good week. Enjoy the weather. I'm
just going to say one more thing though, because I think your friend Elle is on the chat. Is she a good demon? Honest?
No, that's someone else. That's Joe.
Okay, but they're watching Predator, and I just want to say there will never be a Predator set of rules for the Alien RPG. Two totally different licenses, but there are fan productions, and Exius Dev, who's one of the other commenters, the first thing he did with the Alien rules was create Predator for it. So search for Predator if you want to.
And if you're, so I wasn't going to ask this, I'm going to mention it now because it's just Joe brought up, but I believe the guy whose name I can't remember, who was involved in Alien RPG right in the first place, did a Kickstarter for the Terminator license.
Yeah, Andrew Gasker, has been involved in the Terminator Kickstarter as well. So that's with Nightfall Games, and so they're Scottish, so you can get them on and same time zone, all that sort of stuff.
That
Wow.
was going to be my question. Was were Freely involved in licensing with that as well? But you've answered the question there. It was different.
I don't know. I can imagine. So they haven't told us exactly what this list is, but they said some years ago that they got together and said, what are the 5 major licenses we wouldn't say no to? And Alien was one, and Lord of the Rings was another. And even so, when Francesco went to them with Lord of the Rings, they'd just said, look, we're producing too many games. We mustn't make any new ones. And then they were offered Lord of the Rings and they went, okay, we'll do Lord of the Rings as well, or the One Ring. So those are 2 of them. There are 3 others. I can only imagine Predator wasn't one of those other 3. Terminator wasn't one of those other 3.
Yeah. Right, that's really it now. So no more questions.
So no more questions. Just done.
So Dave, if you'd like to roll the end credits, we'll say goodbye now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
And, see you later in the week.
Love you.